Now that we have console access, we can start doing some basic configuration on our switch. One of the first things we want to do is set up the switch so that we can access it remotely. We don't want to have to always be adjacent to the switch plugged in via a console cable. To do that, we need to set up an IP address, a management IP address that we can use to connect with the switch. We can connect via Telnet, we can connect via Secure Shell, but for now, let's just see how we set up that management IP address. I just erased the configuration on the switch and booted it up, so this is what the switch might look like if it came from the factory. I press enter and it asks me if I want to enter the initial configuration dialog. I don't want to do that. We're going to be setting this up from scratch. I'm going to say no, and we're taken to the switch prompt. One of the things we'll do in a future video is to change the name of that prompt from switch to something a bit more descriptive. But for now, our focus is on getting an IP address assigned to this switch so that we can access it remotely. By the way, if we're curious as to how we're accessing it right now, here's a command for you. We can do show line to see how we're connecting into the switch. And you see the little asterisk, the star, next to CTY. CTY is referring to our console port. I'm connected via the console port, and as a result, there's a little star next to it telling me that that's how I'm connected. We also have 16 virtual terminal lines. That's what VTY represents. It's a virtual terminal. And when we connect via Telnet or Secure Shell, we're going to be using one of those 16 virtual terminal lines. For now, though, let's set up this IP address. Notice the greater than sign prompt we have right now after switch. That tells us that we're in user mode. From user mode, we can give a variety of show commands. Not every show command, but we can give some show commands. We're not able to do any configuration, though. To do any configuration, we need to go into a privileged mode. The way we go into privileged mode is to give the keyword of enable, and we can press enter. By the way, if you want to back out to user mode, we can say disable. And while we're here, let's talk about a couple of features of Cisco iOS that we're now in. I typed out the entire word enable earlier. I could have used a shortcut. I could have typed in EN, and if there were no other commands available at this user prompt in Cisco iOS that began with EN, if this were unique, then I could press the tab key. I just press tab, and it writes out the entire word for me, enable. That's called tab auto-completion. And we can press enter to get into privilege mode. If you're curious as to what commands are available in a particular mode, you can give a question mark. The question mark will tell you what commands are available from this point in your configuration. I'm going to press the Q key to abort this. I'm now in privilege mode, which gives me permission to do configuration. To tell the switch I want to configure it, I need to give the command configure terminal. And as a shortcut, I can say conf T. I could type out configure space terminal, but even without using the tab auto completion, if I type in a string of letters that are unique at this point in the configuration, Cisco iOS knows what I mean. So instead of typing out configure terminal, I can just do a conf T and it knows what I mean. We've now entered global configuration mode. When we see config in parentheses, that means we're in global configuration mode. We need to go into a different configuration mode, however, to set up the management IP address. We need to go into an interface configuration mode. And on the switch, the default configuration gives us a VLAN, a virtual LAN. And coming up later in the module, we'll talk a lot more about VLANs. But right now, all of the ports on this switch, they belong to the same VLAN. They belong to the same broadcast domain. And I can assign an IP address associated with that VLAN. It's going to be the switch's management IP address. It's the management VLAN. Here's how we do it. I'm going to go into interface, and I could just type in INT because that is unique, or I could do a tab auto completion. I'll tap the tab key, interface, and I'll say VLAN 1. That's the default management VLAN that we have on the switch. And I need to give it an IP address. I'll say IP address, and the IP address I want to assign to the switch as the management IP address is 192.168.1.11. But that's not enough information. Just like when you're setting up your PC, besides having an IP address, you also have to have a subnet mask. And in a future module, we'll talk a lot about subnet masks and exactly what they mean and how to interpret them. For now, let's just say that we've been told that our subnet mask is 255.255.255.0. And on a Cisco Catalyst switch, by default, this VLAN 1 interface is administratively turned on. Just as a precaution, though, if you're setting up an IP address on an interface, it's usually a good practice if you want that interface to be active, just to make sure it's not administratively shut down for some reason. It's a good idea to do a no shutdown command. We can say no shutdown, or just no shut would do it as well. We were already up, but just for confirmation, I like to do a no shutdown. We've now assigned a management IP address to this switch. And in a future video, we're going to be telnetting to that IP address, and we're going to be doing a secure shell connection to that IP address.